unleashing female power.
Being a disruptor.
I'm always constantly telling the truth.
I love
art. That's all her life.
She's alive and female.
Being a woman, what it meant.
Prove him wrong.
Girls run the world.
We're rocking the place.
Welcome to the Art Pod. I'm your host, Carolina, and I'll be your guide through this Pandora's box. Strap yourselves in for a journey through the art world where we bring you candid conversations, untold stories, uncover industry secrets, and celebrate the women who are shaping its future. Because in the Art Pod, the spotlight is always on the girls. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Art Pod. My guest today is Katherine Ryckman Siegwarth. And she's the Executive Director of FotoFocus, a nonprofit arts organization that champions photography and lens-based art. Previously, she served as the Dayton Art Institute's Kettering Curator of Photography and Special Projects. Prior to the DAI, she was the Assistant Director of Zulon Gallery in Dallas, Texas, Luce Curatorial Fellow of Photography at the Mon Carter Museum of American Art in Fort Worth, Texas, and held positions at the Center for Creative Photography in Tucson, Arizona. Siegwarth has a bachelor's and master's of arts in art history from the University of Arizona. She's an alumni of the Museum Leadership Institute's NextGen 2020 Executive Education for the Next Generation of Museum Leaders program. Welcome.
Hi.
And let's start at the beginning, which is your current role as the Executive Director of FotoFocus Cincinnati. Can you tell us a little bit about FotoFocus?
So FotoFocus is a arts nonprofit based in Cincinnati, Ohio that champions photography and lens-based art. We were founded in 2010 with the vision of inspiring conversations about the world through the art of photography. And we do this through a variety of signature programs, most notably our biennial. We're in our 7th iteration this year, and it has 107 projects at 86 venues across Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus, Ohio, and Northern Kentucky.
That's wild.
Yeah.
How do you source these 86 locations?
So we, one after this being our 7th iteration, we do still get new venues, but we are building a network that we've had dedicated people apply, and we are an invitational. So people have the opportunity to ask to participate in our biennial. That ranges from your larger cultural institutions like the Cincinnati Art Museum, the Contemporary Arts Center, the Wexner Arts Center in Columbus, the Dayton Art Institute in Dayton, Ohio, but then a lot of the universities within that system, the Wright State University, University of Dayton, University of Cincinnati DAP, Northern Kentucky University, and I'm missing several others. Art Academy of Cincinnati is a major one located near our office. And then you go from there to other galleries and even the occasional coffee shop or cafe that produce really interesting exhibitions that provide a huge variety to our biennial.
That's amazing. So you mentioned that this is the 7th iteration of this biennial. Can you tell us a little bit about the theme this year and how you kind of kept it fresh and new from the previous years?
Yeah, so each biennial has had a theme since 2014. This year's theme is backstories, which I think is a really lovely theme. I think it's very similar to our other themes, but maybe a more accessible and approachable word. I think we all have some idea of what that can mean. So how we're using it is, how does our interpretation of a photograph change when we understand what happened before or after the image was taken? How does our interpretation change when we understand what's happening outside the frame, or if we learn more about the photographer? Conversely, how does our interpretation of a historical truth shift when challenged by a photograph? How can an image disrupt a commonly held narrative? So those are some of the ways that we're using the theme this year, which all of our themes try to be as broad as possible. That allows more people to apply, to have this more communal interpretation of the theme, and allows us to be surprised by what people are interested in and how they choose to interpret that. But again, I think that one of the strengths of this year is the accessibility of the word. uh, I think one of my favorite themes was in 2016, which was photography, the undocumented, which in many ways is a very similar concept to backstories, but isn't necessarily as approachable to a general public. It really works for the photo nerds, which I am.
Okay, fair. You also mentioned that FotoFocus also has, other programming that it does, like film and video programming, the FotoFocus Symposium, and the FotoFocus Talk Series. Can you tell us a little bit more about those?
Absolutely. Our organization really started through a talk series. In the 90s, our founder, as well as other like-minded photo enthusiasts, saw an opportunity to bring photographers and speakers to Cincinnati to just have more engagement. And so that series, starting in the 90s as the Lightborn series, eventually morphed into into FotoFocus as a whole. We continued that on with our spring lecture. This year we had Roger Ross Williams as a speaker. He's a filmmaker and producer. Perhaps most notably to some, worked on the 1619 project and Stamped from the Beginning, Hulu and Netflix respectively. But the year prior, our first talk since COVID, that was Sky Hopinka, a very different filmmaker, artist, poet, but it's these lovely ways of no, not a problem. Life happens.
Yeah.
It's been a really varied and lovely series. I think, and the person before COVID started was William Wegman, who everyone knows and loves. The amount of questions about Weimaraners was, as you might expect, intense. But it's a great way to just bring this kind of love and curiosity of photography to Cincinnati.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. Is there anything in particular that you want to accomplish or see done as the executive director at FotoFocus?
Well, so I came on at an interesting moment. I'm the second executive director of FotoFocus. Their founding director retired after 12 years. And when I became director, maybe 7 days later, we started a construction project.
Wow, just right
Off the bat. And so it's this really exciting moment of growth that I'm getting to help realize. We will soon have the FotoFocus Center, which is located in the Mount Auburn OTR region of Cincinnati, just a little north of downtown. And the building will have about 4,500 square feet of gallery space over 2 floors. And so that will be this incredibly foundational shift of what FotoFocus is to the general public of Cincinnati and the region. As of right now, we have a really incredible, dedicated group of followers who understand the scope and capacity of what FotoFocus is. But most of our engagement is through the biennial with these 107 projects at venues all over the region. And so people are maybe less familiar with who we are and just see this name pop up for a month in October. The building will allow us to have day-to-day engagement and interaction with the region through exhibitions and additional related programming by having some of those signature programs in our space, not necessarily all of them though. And so that's kind of what I'm most excited about right now, is helping to shape that growing future that still remains in essence what we've always done.
Yeah, I mean, a permanent structure definitely changes the scope of what you can do and extends it to a whole new level. And you mentioned that the new building is opening up in 2025.
Correct.
Is there anything that you want to share or want to talk about, or like about upcoming programming, or is everything still hush hush?
It's I work with a great creative team who has a lot of different ideas. We're thinking through things, but I am very much in the construction brain at the moment.
Fair.
We have just gotten the electricity hooked up to the building, but it's not turned on.
Okay.
And that is a critical pathway. Once the that's turned on, it takes a couple weeks for the HVAC system to turn on, a week or two for it to calibrate, to then dry out the space so that we can put up the drywall, put in the wood floor, the trim, all of these major aspects of construction. And there was just a slight delay for something, and it's not, it's not a delay that if it's a week here, it's just a week at the end. I'm still waiting to see what that potentially compounded implication is. So as much as I would love to talk about programming, I also want to, not jinx it and allow it to potentially shift based on, they're still looking at a few fluid concepts. So give that all the space it needs to formulate.
Yeah, I know. I've worked on it in a museum while we were constructing the first space and the second space. So I know that when you kind of have hopes and dreams for an opening day, that rarely kind of manifests, and you kind of have to be more flexible.
Yes, I have also worked at a space that was a new construction project, and we had a little bit more rigid opening date.
Okay.
And that is, it's easier to learn from the things that it's easier to remember the what not to do lessons. So I'm currently trying to keep that kind of fluidity within our ability to shift dates as needed, and while trying to, plan forward.
Yeah, I think that's the right mindset.
Yeah.
So you originally began at FotoFocus as a biennial director, and you were in that role for a little bit over a year, and then becoming the executive director. But you also had contact with FotoFocus very early on. Can you kind of tell us what attracted you to working with FotoFocus?
Sure. So I joined FotoFocus in December of 21 as their biennial director, and then in 23 became executive director. But I first learned of FotoFocus in October 2014. I had just moved here to be the exhibition coordinator and curatorial associate at the Dayton Art Institute. I had just moved from Fort Worth, Texas to Dayton. And when people understood that my interest was in photography, they said, you have to go down to Cincinnati. You have to see what this FotoFocus thing is about. And I had no idea what they were talking about. I went down for another meeting, and people there were like, you have to go here to see these FotoFocus things. And it was remarkable walking into this renovated space that had a Vivian Maier exhibition. And then next door, there was a Benjamin Sherry exhibition, and not understanding why what looked like a residential or, quasi-commercial space had this artwork. And then leaving town the next morning, realizing that John Waters had been a keynote speaker that night, and I could have gone, but I didn't understand what was happening. And I made it my purpose to figure out what was going on. And so FotoFocus has been like this lifeline for me when I was at the Dayton Art Institute, because it allowed me to very quickly reconnect with a larger photo world, to see all of these incredible speakers just, in my backyard. And then as I began curating exhibitions at the Dayton Art Institute, it was also a remarkable support system to help me realize the exhibitions I was interested in showing.
Yeah, it's incredible because you got to experience FotoFocus on the front end and now the back end.
Yeah, it was, I really enjoy now being on the other side of the curtain. And when that opportunity presented itself, it was really a no-brainer.
Speaking of being on the other side of the curtain, can you tell me what your favorite aspects of your job are?
Well, so since so much of it is still biennial based, I think the ability to help all these other organizations realize their projects. So while there are 107 exhibitions, that's happening at 86 venues. So that's 86 partner organizations who, like when I was at the Dayton Art Institute, of which they are still a participating venue. They have another lovely photo curator, and I'm looking forward to seeing that exhibition next week. I know how difficult it is to realize an exhibition, and sometimes to do the projects you actually want to do when there are all these other stakeholders and constituents and membership bases and museum store sales that you have to consider when planning out an exhibition season. And so knowing how important FotoFocus was to help me, take risks, to get some of that financial responsibility off of the development department or the museum store, to allow us to try and engage with new audiences, to do different types of programs. That was so critical to my happiness at the Dayton Art Institute. And it's something that's really important that we continue to do for other venues.
Yeah. And now on the flip side, tell me about the most challenging aspect of your role.
It is probably still working with 107 projects at 86
Fair.
venues. That's an incredible amount of information and details to try to condense and explain to the public. And I'm really fortunate to work with a lot of incredible people who are so much better with Excel spreadsheets than me. So because we are an application invitational, so we are reviewing application data. We are making decisions. We are then extending offers and invitations to join us. We then go through a process of explaining we need this information from you by this date, which includes the nitty gritty, like your opening hours. Please confirm that your address is the same as 2
Yep.
years ago, because it's not always. Your phone number, having all of that information on our website, producing a catalog and a venue map so that, the public has one place to kind of find all the information, then, but please call the venue to confirm that things are happening. But to have that all consolidated in one place is really helpful, but it takes an incredible amount of work to make that happen.
Yeah, I can imagine. So then I assume you start working on the biennial right as one is finishing.
Absolutely. So our biennial is the month of October. We will start talking with those venues again in February, March,
Mhm.
with the idea that that application for the next biennial is due September of the non-biennial year. So we immediately hit the ground running. And, I do appreciate that many of our venues also have, multi-year exhibition schedules. And so they keep us honest too when they start asking about, well, what's the theme in a couple of
Yeah.
years? Let's start having those conversations so that we know that what we're trying to achieve is in line with your theme, so that they can continue to participate and be part of that celebration.
Yeah, and then you also mentioned that it is an application process and sometimes you have to say no to some people.
Yeah, it's not often.
Okay.
We were really founded by a group of people who just love photography, want it to be celebrated. And, I think generosity is one of our core values. So it's another reason why we say photography and lens-based art.
Mhm.
We're really photo people, but we want to allow some expansion on that concept.
Okay.
Um, but occasionally it's just a little too much, or maybe something about the venue doesn't feel right, or something in the application doesn't feel fully baked.
Mhm.
And so sometimes that involves additional conversations with those people. And other times it's just let's talk again in 2 years.
And do you always keep it around the same amount of exhibitors or does that vary widely?
It has increased every year. So the previous biennial was 101 projects, so this is
Mhm.
107. So pretty close. I think that's also just maybe a good plateauing of data and venues.
Yeah.
I think when we started, it was more like 50 projects. So
Okay. That's a double.
it has reached a fever pitch, if you will.
Yeah, at some point, logistically, you're like, okay, when do we stop?
Right. So I think that's another thing is, I have, at this point, I've seen 60 exhibitions.
Mhm.
I'm hoping to see as many as possible, but I already know of a few that I won't be able to make it to. So trying to understand when are we doing a service still for those venues
Mhm.
when we have so many places to see in that short period of time. So I think, constant collaboration and communication with people to understand what their needs are, what it is that the biennial helps them with, will help kind of guide what those numbers continue to look like.
Are you looking forward to any sort of collaborative projects with other institutions that champion photography and lens-based media in the future?
I think we always welcome those opportunities. It's partly why we've really felt quite lucky with the venues that we do have, even in Cincinnati.
Mhm.
FotoFocus currently does not have an exhibition space.
Right.
So a lot of our exhibitions are done at partnering venues. We've also had the opportunity to bring in guest curators who do remarkable exhibitions who are then partnering with other institutions. So I think that there's a great precedent for that when we open the PhotoFocus Center to see how we can collaborate, join resources, and then also it's an incredible amount of work to put on an exhibition
Yeah.
to then only have it seen for say 12 weeks,
Yeah.
a traditional museum timeframe. So the idea of being able to collaborate with organizations where it might then go there and more people can see this, the remarkable work that these people do, that is always enticing.
Yeah. 100%. Well, thank you so much for sharing your role, a little bit about your role and about photo focus. And now I want to kind of backtrack a little bit and go back to your studies.
Oh.
At your to your education. You hold a BA in interdisciplinary studies, an MA in art history and the history of photography from the University of Arizona. Can you tell us a little bit about how your studies reinforce what you currently do?
Sure. So, an interdisciplinary study degree is essentially I graduated with 4 minors.
Okay, I was about
Um,
to ask. I'm like, what is this?
so, and it actually does. It will answer your question quite well. So, I started undergrad thinking I was going to be pre med.
You are like the 10th guest on my podcast who has said this.
And I'm probably, and I, not that, sidetrack. And then when I was debating what to do when I decided not to be pre-med, I was also then like, maybe I should be a lawyer. And I think a lot of other art historians I know either actually were lawyers or also considered that because we're just weirdos. But
Fair.
I was pre-med, taking a genetics class, and I just realized how much I hated what I was doing. Like I was doing calculus to try to map the length of a gene, and I essentially Marie Kondoed my life. I'm like, this is bringing me no joy. Is this really the direction I want to go?
I love that.
Called my parents the next day. I'm like, I'm going to become an art historian. They're like,
What?
oh, okay. My mother is a civil engineer. My father is an economist. But I'm also very fortunate that like my parents had always taken me to museums. So they understood that I loved art and museums. And while maybe slightly hesitant, they were on board pretty quickly. When I went to switch my major at the University of Arizona, the way that the art history program was set up was to have a major in art history. Like you would have to stay another year. I was already, let's see, maybe I made this decision fall of junior year. It was something like when they said I'd have to stay for undergrad for an additional year, I thought I'm not going to do that because what I now know is to enter this field, I need a graduate degree. And so I went into the interdisciplinary studies office and submitted a proposal for getting me into grad school.
Oh, okay.
So my, essentially the degree was art history minor, French, because for graduate school, you're required to have at least one language. And then I made up a minor that had like business writing courses, philosophy, history, an arts management course. And then my fourth one was molecular and cellular biology.
Oh my God.
So an incredible, like, I think I got a great degree out of that interdisciplinary.
You know, like everything at this point, a little bit of everything.
A little sampling here and there, which is maybe also explains why I tend to be a little bit more interested in like the photographers who deal with science or biodiversity. Who knows? Maybe that has something to do with it. But it was a great degree because I felt like I got a fairly broad base education there. And what I didn't realize, I was very fortunate in this way. I wanted to go to do art history. I liked the photo professor at the University of Arizona. Her name is Kate Albers. And so and when I realized I wanted to study the history of photography, I'm like, well, this makes perfect sense. Um, and it's right next door to the Center for Creative Photography, which is the largest repository of North American
Wow.
photography archives in the world. So really, I just like somehow landed, in my opinion, at one of the best possible schools to then continue on for, a master's in art history, specializing in the history of photography.
Mhm. That's an incredible journey and very unique to
Yeah.
to my guests on the art pod. What would you say is something that you have taken away from your studies that you carry with you till this day in your professional life?
One of my professors, her name's Pia Cuneo. She teaches, or she's retired now, but teaches Renaissance art. She also taught like a real world class, just like some basic things that you need to know.
Like taxes.
Yeah, I wish that not quite that extensive, but every time that I have to write a speech, I do it in the format she told me to write it in because it helps you better pace your timing.
That's amazing.
And it's, it seems silly, but I think we've all been in the lecture where maybe people went a little too far. They forgot the time frame that they were supposed to do, but that system has always worked well for me. And then it's also then about, she made us study our speeches so that we don't sound like we're reading a paper. And it's, I used to be terrified of public speaking. Just those little things, I think of her often.
No, that's a great life skill because, a lot of people, especially academics, have to do public speaking. And as an executive director, you will do a ton of public speaking. So
Yes,
this is a skill.
It is a skill, although I will say breaking up a crowd, like yelling to say thank you all for coming, is still like one of the most terrifying things I have to do, or at least the most energy draining, because it's like you're literally pulling the energy out of the room and then trying to throw it back at them and say, okay, continue having fun.
Yeah, it's like rounding up like wild animals, honestly.
Yeah.
So one of your earliest professional experiences was as an archives technician at the Western Archaeological and Conservation Center in Tucson. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience and how you began actually working there?
I do not recall how I came across that job position. The funny aspect of how I know I got the job was that my handwriting was better than the two people interviewing me.
No way.
That was an actual requirement. And I, in middle school, had to take shop.
Okay.
I went to a school where all kids had to take home ec and wood shop. And you had to learn how to write in wood shop. So I do tend to write in all caps. And so that actually landed me that position, which was great. It's that center is essentially, it works with the National Park Service to help go through all of their records, consolidate, compile their information, create finding aids, and then give it back to the parks so that they, keep their files in order, essentially. So there's a lot of details that I learned there that kind of helped me better understand and appreciate what the registrars of museums do. And if I could give people one piece of advice, everyone should befriend the registrars because they know everything. They are good people.
100%. I vouch for that. I worked at museums and galleries, and registrars are your go-tos.
Yeah.
After this, you were also the curatorial research intern at the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art, a loose curatorial fellow at the Mon Carter Museum, and the assistant director at the Zulon Gallery in Dallas, including also you worked for the Center for Creative Photography, which you mentioned just now. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the most important things you took away from these experiences?
Sure. So at the Center for Creative Photography, I worked in the registration and preparation departments. So I one of the main projects I was able to work on was updating the metadata and rehousing the W. Eugene Smith archive,
Mhm.
um, which is remarkable. How many photographs, love his work. But the process of doing all that, understanding the needs and care of the work, then working with the prep department to install photographs, to frame photos, to help manage inventory information as they were traveling exhibitions. I think that those were really important for me as I then moved into curatorial
Mhm.
because I had a better understanding of what my coworkers needed to have happen.
Yeah.
Um, when I got to the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, that was also a really fantastic fellowship. It was an 18-month gig. Um, I learned I learned so much about photography itself, but also the process of exhibitions. I learned an incredible amount from their exhibitions manager, which then helped me get the position at the Dayton Art Institute, where I became kind of their inaugural exhibitions coordinator. So I then had these people I could turn to and say, "I've seen it done this way," and then ask them how can I help implement certain things. And so I think all of those positions as, fellowships and interns and graduate student worker, getting to dabble in a lot of hats helped me understand really what all it takes to put together exhibitions and to, um, not work in a silo, most
Yeah.
importantly.
Yeah. And I think it's such a wide range of roles that you've had at all these different sorts of places. I can only imagine that honestly this has also prepped you for being an executive director at FotoFocus.
I would like to think so.
Yeah. But now I want to go to your work or what you did at the Dayton Art Institute in Dayton, Ohio, because you were there for 7 years. And you held positions as the Kettering Exhibitions Coordinator and Curatorial Associate, Kettering Assistant Curator of Collections and Exhibitions, and Kettering Curator of Photography and Special Projects. And I read this amazing interview where you give this anecdote that when you were a teen, you visited the Dayton Art Institute with your grandma and you saw an Ansel Adams photograph. And that's had such a profound impact on you. Was it surreal for you to have that experience and then go to work at the DAI and curate your own photography exhibitions?
It was, yeah. I mean, I do remember it was something like, not only was I walking with my grandmother, but I was also pushing the stroller of my newborn cousin.
Oh,
Because my family, so I largely grew up in Arizona, but my family is from Dayton. So I'd always go to visit. So the Dayton Art Institute is one of those, you know, foundational museum memories for me. But just the way that the building curves, I was pushing the stroller and then you in this hallway and then it opened up into the big exhibition space. And there is, arguably Ansel Adams' most iconic photograph. And it is for a reason. I didn't know who he was when I was 12, but that remains a remarkable image to me. It's just gorgeous. And so, yeah, getting to then return to that space and, it's changed some, but it hasn't
yeah.
changed a lot since I was a kid. It was great. It was interesting. And, my father, when I joined that museum, made sure to tell me that there was a specific painting that had to always be on view because that was the painting he loved from his childhood.
I
So,
love that.
it was nice having like, a much deeper connection with the building in place than I think many people have an opportunity to experience.
When did your love of photography start?
That's a good question. Another foundational memory for me as far as museums go is the Carnegie International.
Mm.
I did live in Pittsburgh very briefly, maybe third through seventh grade. And I remember seeing a Tony Ausler work, which for those who knows his work, seeing that as a 9-year-old, you're going to remember that.
Yeah.
Which then the last biennial in 2022, we did a project with Tony Ausler and I 100% geeked out about that. But I remember taking a photography class with my mom in third grade. and that was fun. I think though I knew I wanted to study the history of photography when I had decided to, move into art history as grad school. I was in Santa Fe with my family, and we went into the Monroe Gallery that had an exhibition of life photographers. So all of these just iconic, beautiful photojournalistic images, and it was so impactful. I'm like, this is what I want to study.
Yeah, I love when people share like these core memories that they have about what made them fall in love with art, and specifically, specific art like lens-based art and things like that. I feel like it's so nice.
Yeah, because something happened.
Something happened somewhere along the way.
And it's nice when you can remember or think you remember what that was.
Yeah. But now back to you being at Dayton. Can you tell us a little bit about how you actually got the job there?
Sure. So my fellowship at the Amon Carter was a temporary position, 18 months. So I bet as many other people who you've had on this podcast or some of your listeners know, temporary positions are great, but you have to immediately start applying elsewhere. And so I was applying to national job boards or looking at them, and fortunate enough where I could just look to move wherever there was a job. But because I had gone to the Dayton Art Institute as a kid, I knew the museum existed. And they had not posted to the national job boards this one position for an exhibition coordinator. So I applied. I, maybe slightly embellished by saying how lovely it would be to move back to my hometown. I had not
You should
truly
have just
lived
told them
there.
the grandma story.
Well, yeah, I should have. Well, it's become a great one for. I think I told that story to a journalist when I took the position in Dayton, and then she did just recycle that quote for another article because it is a lovely story. Yeah. But so when I mentioned, I'd love to move back to my hometown, Dayton isn't necessarily a tourist destination city. It's a lovely place, the birthplace of flight.
Okay, did not know that.
I lived
Fun
right
fact.
next to the Wright brothers We Made It mansion when I lived there. And that's, again, a core memory of being a kid sledding down that giant hill when I'd visit my grandparents. But so that, having some understanding of that institution or that it was there and applying and with that more personal connection, I think got me to the next level with them.
Oh yeah, 100%. Can you tell us a little bit more about what all the roles that you had there kind of entailed and the responsibilities that you had?
Sure. So when I joined the museum, there was one curator, and they had argued that there needed to be this additional position that was a curatorial associate, but also an exhibition coordinator. They recognized the need to have somebody who could work across departments for getting exhibitions put together. There wasn't a system for how label copy was vetted, how the marketing department communicated with curatorial about content and image rights. Not that they didn't have some systems in place, but there's always room for improvement. So that was really what I came in to do, was create a little bit more connection between departments that, just the physical structure of the building had, I think, created silos in and of itself. The curatorial department was behind an additional set of locked doors. People literally couldn't just go ask a question. So working to kind of dismantle some of those barriers. And then because I did have experience with curatorial work and writing labels and developing exhibitions, I quickly kind of inserted myself into that practice because it's something I enjoyed. And the Dayton Art Institute has a lovely photography collection of their maybe 27,000 objects. 18,000 are photographic objects. So I was able to start very quickly curating in-house shows, working with the chief curator to do joint projects. And then it just kind of went from there. When she when she left for another position at the Nelson Atkins, there was maybe a year, maybe a year and a half, where I was then the sole curator essentially of a encyclopedic institution. So again, being able to lean on all of these experiences of different hats was really critical in that moment. But it was a lot of fun getting to not only do photography, but all of these, a more of a generalist position.
Yeah. So, I mean, you were there for 7 years, which means you must have loved being there.
Yeah.
Can you tell me maybe some of your favorite aspects of working there?
Well, it was always a place of great possibility.
Mm-hmm.
They had done some really great projects in the past. They were heavily impacted, like many museums, by the crash in 2008.
Yeah.
But I moved there because I knew what they could be, and I wanted to be a part of that. And so I think that possibility kept me going for a long time. And we got to do wonderful exhibitions, and I really enjoyed my coworkers in the curatorial department. I enjoyed the other ones too, but I was obviously, in case you're listening, this is not anything personal.
Favoritism.
But it was there was always room to do something. And because it was this encyclopedic museum, but a really small curatorial department, it just meant that there were so many things I had the opportunity to try. I was the in-house curator for a South African contemporary beadwork exhibition.
Wow.
That was a wonderful project, and it was a moving one based on the stories that were associated with it. I wouldn't have the opportunity to do that at a larger institution, where you're far more within your defined roles. So I think that was what kept me there for so long, was just the enjoyment of getting to try different things and to learn so many new things.
I can totally relate to that because I've worked for institutions that were like on the smaller end, and I feel like they taught me skills and things that there's no way I would have ever had the experience of doing in larger institutions. And I feel like that actually pushed me forward much more quickly in
Absolutely.
my professional career because of those opportunities. And I always say that it's amazing if you can work at a smaller scale institution rather than a bigger one, like early on in your career. I feel like you gain so much more from those experiences.
I would absolutely agree. Yeah.
So you got to work on exhibitions, obviously. Was there any particular one that you were extremely proud of that you worked on?
Well, my FotoFocus exhibitions are the ones
Yes.
I do enjoy. Let's see, the first one I was able to work on, kind of my first big show at Dayton was a a two-person exhibition with Richard Moss and Edward Bertinsky. And it was just kind of looking at how these artists are considering or utilizing 19th century tropes of the sublime, and as seen in photography. Obviously the sublime concept is older than that, but inverting it to this idea of the ravages that we have put on the landscape. So like with Edward Bertinsky, having come from the Amon Carter Museum, which is a Western American art museum largely. It's expanded now, but it started as a Western art museum. I was so inundated with images of gold mining and silver mining. So this idea of sublime images of Colorado where you're extracting materials, and then to see images like Edward Bertinsky where there are these absolutely gorgeous and colorful images, but they're tailings ponds. They're these toxic environments. So I was really interested in showing that work. This is a great example of some shows aren't good to have during the holiday season.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have been able to do it though without FotoFocus. That support and backing allowed the museum to take the risk. It was not the holiday show. The museum store didn't necessarily love me for that exhibition.
I
Um,
wonder why.
but 2 years later, for the next PhotoFocus biennial, I was able to bring in a traveling exhibition of Mickalene Thomas
Oh,
photographs.
nice.
So again, and not all of my coworkers were necessarily familiar with her work, and so there was some like questioning of what are we talking about? What is this? Um, Again, are our members going to like this? Who is our audience? But photo focus backing and that support and that additional marketing boost made that show happen. And when it did happen, it was remarkable to see how my coworkers came together for it. They all just loved it so much, how they were able to try new things, to engage with new audiences, and all these, you know, s- outside the artwork itself, all of these ancillary details that museums have to consider. Um, I was happy with those. Those were great projects.
Yeah, that's amazing. So obviously your role at Dayton relied heavily on exhibitions and coordinating exhibitions. Can you tell us what was one of the most challenging aspects of curating an exhibition?
Hmm. I would say making it relevant to a public. You know, Museums are not there for curators to produce pet projects. It's supposed to find ways to engage with a larger public to make concepts relevant to their everyday lives and to bring art into it. And so, as an example, that Ravaged Sublime exhibition wall, something I was really interested in, this environmental concern, this lineage with art historical philosophy and 19th century photography in the West. That sounds really niche, but how do you translate that then into this is this is happening everywhere. This is our backyard. These are scenes that, you know, I know exactly where to find a tailings pond in Dayton, Ohio. How do you make those concepts relevant and interesting to the people that you're there to serve? And I think that that's the challenge. That's also the exciting part. It's also where collaboration is key within curatorial work. Um, at the museums I've worked at, there was always conversations with the education department to make sure that things felt broad enough and accessible and engaging. There were conversations with marketing, not just to promote the show and the story, but to get that different perspective from all your coworkers. In those exhibition meetings I would sometimes host, sometimes it was a just getting random feedback to see what people's interpretations were, to make sure that you were understanding, if I'm stuck with this jargon over here, does it actually translate to my colleague who had a completely different life trajectory? How did they interpret what I'm saying? Is it going to connect and be enriching for our guests?
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your experiences. And before we head into the fire round of questions,
Oh.
I always like to end by asking if my guest has faced any challenges in particular as a woman working in the field.
Well, I think overall, the museum field has been fairly traditional,
Hmm.
maybe slow to change. But I've seen a lot of change of late that gives me hope. I think I have faced some challenges that many of your guests and you have probably faced, but I think I've been incredibly fortunate to work with some wonderful people. You know, as I mentioned, my grad school advisor was a woman. And also working with great women
Yeah.
too, and that makes a difference. My supervisor at the Amon Carr Museum, John Rohrbach, was an incredible mentor. He is not the give you a gold star kind of guy. He
Okay.
gave constructive criticism, and he made me better for it. But I also then worked with so much of what I know about photographic process. I learned at the Amon Carter from their head of conservation, Sylvie Penichon, who's now the head of photography and prints conservation at the Art Institute of Chicago. And I think another reason I was able to thrive at the Dayton Art Institute was that the chief curator at the time, Amy Marcereau de Gallon, wanted to work collaboratively. She wanted to help me grow as a curator, and we worked well together. And without that kind of support and friendship and collegiality, I couldn't have made it this far. And I also feel really fortunate to somehow have landed in a very female-based company.
Mm-hmm.
The FotoFocus, the founding director was Mary Ellen Goki, a woman who, I've loved since the day I met her in 2014. And I work with some really great colleagues like Carissa Barnard, who is our director of curatorial strategy. And when you can find good people and work with them, it's remarkable what can be done.
100%. And then also, do you have any advice for incoming generations of women who are looking to work in the arts?
I would say always ask for a coffee date.
Okay.
One of the things that I did early on was when I would go visit somebody, like a friend or a family member, I would look up who's the curator, or the director. I would send random emails to people I did not know, just saying, I'm interested in the field. I'm in town. Would you have, 20 minutes for a coffee to chat? And it's surprising how many people said yes. The chief curator at the Dayton Art Institute was one of those people. Elizabeth Siegel, who was at the Art Institute of Chicago, was one of those people. Karen Irvine at the Museum of Contemporary Photography was one of those people. And it just, it's still a network that I have access to.
Mm-hmm.
But they, I was very green behind the ears, and they gave me all sound advice. It wasn't all the same advice, but they were honest conversations based on their life experience. And that was really insightful.
I can't help but see that they were all women.
I should say there were some men who also did too, but it is surprising, especially as a young person. It was probably easier to feel more comfortable and candid with women.
Fair. I can relate totally. So now we're heading into the fire round of questions. So essentially I have 10 questions,
Okay.
and I'll ask you to pick a number between 1 and 10, and then I'll read the corresponding question to you. I think we have time for 2 or 3.
Okay.
So pick a number.
How about 5?
5. What is one thing you're sick of hearing?
Well, asked if I'm a photographer.
Okay.
I am an appreciator, not a doer.
Okay.
It is very understandable, though, that many people ask when they learn that I work for a photo-based company
Mhm.
if I'm a photographer. And unless you're qualifying pictures of my cats, in which case I am a proficient,
You're a pro.
prolific artist.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I am not a photographer.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I could see that since you're in a lens-based field.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question. Pick a number.
Ooh, how about 3?
3. If you could talk to anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
Ooh, bad question.
Okay.
Or bad choice on my part. That's
If it's something is too hard, you can switch to another one.
How about let's switch?
Okay.
Yeah. How about 7?
7. What is something that you think everyone should experience in their lifetime?
I think traveling alone.
Okay. I love traveling alone. It's my favorite.
Just being, out of your familiar places and just being with yourself.
Yes.
Traveling alone and not being on your phone the entire
Yes.
time, which is even I am not great at, but I think that is a great way to know yourself.
100% agreed. I travel alone as much as I can, honestly. Okay, one more.
How about 2?
2. Name a book or film that had profound influence in your life.
I thinking of movies I remember seeing in the movie theater.
Mhm.
Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Okay.
I grew up in Arizona, so there's this moment where they go into the backstory, and there's this epic Mongolian desert, and I just remember seeing that on the screen and just being in awe. And admittedly, I do tend to focus more on landscape photography than other
okay.
types. So
Yeah,
who knows?
true.
But that's a movie, like, I remember seeing that movie when it came out.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with a good landscape. Well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing all your wisdom with us and for sharing your experiences. It was so nice speaking with you today.
Yeah, this was a pleasure.
And to everybody listening, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.